Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Internet of Learning podcast. I'm your host, Rajiv Shenoy, and I'm the CTO of Apogee, Higher Ed's largest managed technology services provider. The Internet of Learning is a concept, kind of like the Internet of Things, where technology and innovation will further strategic goals and outcomes of your institution. Over the past 3 years, I have visited nearly 400 universities, and I felt compelled to launch a podcast that fostered more regular conversation and collaboration with higher ed leaders on how technology best practices, leadership principles, and innovation are driving campuses into the future. On our first episode, we are privileged to welcome Heath Price, Associate CIO at the University of Kentucky, to our virtual studio. Heath shares insights into how UK's strategic goals, how his unique background epitomizes the modern technology leader, in my opinion, and his vision and the leadership values are shaping higher ed. I hope you enjoy, and please subscribe below.
Mr. Price, Heath, how's it going? It's Rajiv, and welcome to the first Internet of Learning podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm doing terrific. Thanks so much for letting me be a part of this and giving me some time to visit with you. I really appreciate it.
Tom, so where in the country are you? Are you in Kentucky, in Baton Rouge? Where in the world are you?
I'm traveling a little bit this week, so I'm on the West Coast. We're actually we've got a few folks at UK that are trying to learn more about esports, kind of both the competitive and the community aspects of the casual gaming aspects of what that looks like in higher ed. And so we're actually visiting UC Irvine, who has a very established program, I'd say probably in the last 4 to 5 years on their campus. And so I'm traveling, not in Lexington, but getting back there in the next couple of days once we wrap up with some visits here.
That's interesting. So, esports actually comes up all the time. And I know we hadn't even really discussed this, but when I hear esports, I see two sides of this. So on one hand, I see the entertainment aspect of it. On the other hand, though, there's small schools like Averett College in Southwestern Virginia, I think, where they actually proved that esports drove recruitment, and it's helping to fund some of their more innovative academic technologies like augmented reality. I mean, we'll talk about your role, and I'm just curious. I didn't know that's what you were doing. But are you looking at esports from the same lens, or are you looking at it from we're the number one basketball program in the world, arguably, and esports is our next big sport?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one of the ways I would approach that question, I think I've gotten some really interesting feedback from spending time talking to anybody you can get on the phone with. It's not the easiest industry to crack from a callback perspective because the vendors have a lot going on, whether it's the publishers, whether it's the streaming companies like the Twitch and Amazon and YouTube and Google, right? They've got things moving. And so getting people on the phone, it's about 30 minutes, and it's peppering them with a few questions and seeing how many responses you can get. The feedback I've gotten when I can actually get somebody to talk to is think community before you think competitive. And I think it is interesting to think about seeing some of these universities, colleges, private, public, what have you, doing things that are driving enrollment, driving interest in their universities through esports. Certainly, any university would say, or college would say, yeah, we would love to tap into that. And I wouldn't deny that there could be opportunities for that. But I think what really has stood out in talking to, somebody at Twitch who's running kind of their college program for streaming, and they're really worried about being authentic to the student populations that they're reaching out to. The same thing with Riot Games, talking to somebody on the college side of Riot Games, and his comment is, look, we're worried about our constituents one-to-one. Yeah, we have 100 million active monthly users, sure, but we're also really interested in getting to know these players, and they're around the world. And so if they're in colleges and universities, those can be very small beds of people that we can go and learn more about their habits, learn more about their interests, help us develop, the future of what these games and maybe even future games become. So
Interesting.
I very much see it as community first, and how do we learn about what that community is? How do we think about creating opportunities for a student population that is growing on our campus to maybe be engaged up and down top to bottom of the esports genre. That could be future careers, that could be broadcast, that could be marketing, that could be learning and education around game design, right? There are a lot of elements that go into that.
Well, I love it. I mean, I think the community aspect of it is definitely intriguing. Without going down too deep into this rabbit hole, because I was going to ask if you're a big gamer, but I don't think anyone cares if you game or not. I think what I'm more intrigued by is, why is IT leading the charge in esports? Why not athletics? Why not student affairs? I mean, there just seems to be so many people who could lead the charge. And then I guess my second question to that is, how do you collaborate across the organization, where esports especially has so many nuances to it, like you were outlining?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, there are a couple variables I would point out. Number one, we are, I believe as a university, we're unique in this. We have leadership that looks for big tables, right? And so, I've talked about this in some of our professional experiences over the last year and getting to know each other. I work at a university with a President Capilouto, Provost Blackwell, Dr. Eric Monday, who's our EVP for Finance Administration, and they are looking at opportunities like this to create a big table on campus. And so in some ways, while I do work in IT, this is less about, IT maybe leading it as much as it is IT helping to catalyze some of our involvement and dialogue to create as big a table as possible to get that discussion thinking about the right building blocks to start to be authentic relative to quote unquote esports, casual competitive gaming, and how we want to create that community. And so, the second thing I would maybe say to that, it gets to my background, is I haven't really grown up in any specific area of, subject matter, right? I didn't grow up in IT.
That's right.
I have worked in finance, but only for a few years. I've worked in student life, worked in athletics.
I'm
so I've done a
laughing
lot of
you've
different
been all
things.
over the place. And that's why I was just chuckling. I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's really why I wanted to launch the podcast with you. You use the word catalyst, and to me, that's how I've gotten to know you over the last year. You're just a doer. Like, I think you're one of the few people who will text me on a Saturday at 9 p.m. being like, I just watched this cool video from Google. What do you think? So I think it's take a giant step back. You were at LSU, then you went into the private industry for licensing, then you went back to LSU for finance. Now you've been in IT for 18 months. Like, what? So give us the quick 2-minute of your journey to Associate CIO and kind of what your 3 big responsibilities are for Kentucky going forward.
Yeah, that's great. Well, yeah, so it's definitely been a journey, and one of the cool parts about some of the jumps that you mentioned is that looking back, it's almost harder to see how they happened than it was going through them, because you start to piece together different career opportunities and how you end up getting into a job, and it ends up being something that you might or might not have expected, right? My expectations versus the reality of what the opportunities have been. That's just led me through some really interesting and creative people. And so for me, those travails, that kind of winding path career-wise has been about getting exposed to a lot of different folks across, really it has been higher education, even in the private sector. I've had a lot of involvement through client interactions with universities and colleges, which has just brought about, faculty, staff, administrators, different walks of life. And probably the most formative of those has been interactions and getting to be around students, whether it was on, college athletics, licensing, or whether that was working on, student government projects for fees for a new student center or for, a new rec center, right? So those populations have given me a great respect for what we can be about in higher ed, what it means to be a part of this and kind of be a part of that culture, and how that brought me kind of into this IT sector is a mix of just personal fulfillment and interest. I've always loved technology. I'm kind of fascinated by it, and yet I've never really been the smartest guy in the room. So I've grown up around this environment of wanting to see really talented people work together and figure out ways that, that mind share can really create amazing outcomes. So I think for me, IT, while I wouldn't have predicted it 10 years ago, now 18 months into it is really almost an obvious turn to get to be a part of, because it gives me a canvas to do some of that with others.
Yeah, I always laugh. I've noticed that the smartest people in the room are always the ones to say that they're never the smartest people in the room. and I think you definitely thought it. And I think, again, the reason why I felt compelled to have you kick this off is I actually think you epitomize the modern IT world, where to me the Internet of Learning is this concept of how technology drives all aspects of university life, from research to faculty to the student experience, modern athletics like esports, if you want to call it that. And leadership is actually what's driving the charge. And as I've traveled a lot, you and I talked about this, I've been to 400 universities almost. I've read 371 strategic plans. I'm in Syracuse as we speak. But I think if this podcast is successful, we'll achieve three things, and it'll launch me into my next questions. But one, we'll establish that technology is forever going to change and that our strategy has to be stable throughout time. So how do you create that? Two, it's this idea that leaders are causing the change and creating the sustainable environment, and we're not dictated by technology. So how do you get your leadership principles ahead of change? And then the final piece of it, and I think this is probably most important, is just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And just because technology can do something doesn't mean we need to use it to do that. So I guess jumping into this, I read your strategic plan and I was really impressed by your IT strategic plan. And I was not surprised that they are perfectly aligned. And so in your role, like the first thing in the IT strategic plan is driving student success. And the last thing in the IT strategic plan is around finance, kind of your two worlds. As a leader, how do you shape the culture of IT, and how is it perceived on campus?
Yeah, it's great. Boy, so you might have to help me remember how you frame that, because I can't rewind this yet and listen to it. But because I definitely want to address both. I feel like they're kind of two different paths to the same answer. In thinking about how do you energize a campus? How do you get people thinking? What you just said, or that first part of that question, has a lot of white space to it. I've mentioned a canvas earlier, so my mind kind of goes back to, what our Brian Nichols, our CIO, what we talk about a lot is there's so much low-hanging fruit when we think about what went into the strategic plan. When we think about 150 voices and people from across campus putting thoughts into that strategic plan, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. And so you can naturally say, well, where do you start? But you can also say, what's the end in mind? What are the bigger visions that lead to maybe more collaborative outcomes, that lead to more meaningful outcomes? Well, how do you get to that? Where do you start? That's where people can sit in a room for an hour. You and I can do this podcast for an hour, and we can get energized by those ideas. So where do you start? One approach that I've taken in interacting with people across campus is just, and it sounds super cliche, but it is just spending time listening to people and what their goals are. It does sound really cliche to say that, but what I'm finding as I get into my 40s now is when I hear them talk about what their ambitions and goals are, I'm much more motivated to want to help them figure out a catalyst to get there, instead of maybe what I was doing 15 years ago, which was listening to them so I could win their kind of affection or win their support, but not necessarily having their bigger picture interest in mind. I would go away from the coffee or the lunch and say, oh, that was nice, but hopefully they'll help me when I need something. I feel much more convicted, a part of this idea that you want to help them get what they're trying to go. If you see that there's sensible reasons and opportunities for student engagement or student learning or faculty research and other, if you see there's really meat on the bone, then how do we bring other resources to bear to help those things become a reality? And I mean, so then, you talk about I talk about low hanging fruit, but then you also start thinking about there's so many opportunities to engage people and get their energy, their enthusiasm, their desire for that success behind whatever you want to go accomplish. So one way is to not have all the ideas, but to kind of steward the ideas that already exist, that already sit
Right.
there, ready to blossom, and take those and help make those a part of what we as IT want to be a part of. Now, I want to put a big asterisk. If you want to ask me a question about that, we can, but I want to put a big asterisk in what I feel like in higher ed is just an interesting quandary in 2019, which is, it feels like since I've grown up in this industry over the last almost 20 years, in higher ed and education and thinking about graduate school and research, in so many ways, areas like IT, areas like finance, we have become about our day-to-day jobs. We aren't showing up at the university to contribute to what's happening in computer science or to contribute to what's happening in engineering or in mass comm where they've got an IT major or communications and IT major. We are showing up to make sure that the email is running efficiently, and we're showing up to make sure that the network works. And so,
and is that sad to you, or is that good? Like, I mean, I hear you say that, and on one side, I took away this idea that as a leader you serve, but that as a leader you inspire and you grow. I think where higher ed is struggling is a strong word, but is on the brink of, is focusing a ton of time on the operational aspect of it, which is essential, but not focus on the strategic side of it, especially when it comes to IT. So, I mean, is your vision to move more to the strategic innovation side, or just to be like hyper efficient operators, or both?
Yeah, I really think it's the former, not the latter. But I do think that you've got to have people committed to doing the latter with and through partnerships, or with and through very talented staff that over time have to take the mentality and the look ahead that we're putting ourselves out of a job. I want to take that into my everyday. If I can't help create some of the fabric of what I was just talking about, if we can't find opportunities where, IT as a business service on campus has an integration with what's happening in our academic environment, then it's not that I don't think we can survive. We can survive as a university in the near future, but we certainly can't thrive, and we can't evolve as a land grant university within that environment. We will be stagnant. We will kind of stand still. So I think that the former of driving to that, and it does kind of start to get to the second part of the question you answered, right? Or you asked. I mean, I don't have an answer, but in just thinking about how to address, the issues of, how do you avoid becoming irrelevant? Is disruption coming, or is it already there? Right. I feel like when we think about our IT, what we do today, we don't have enough of a desire to take that mentality of putting ourselves out of a job, to really believe that if we're thoughtful and we're thinking and we're there with students in mind, with researchers in mind first in the solutions that we come with for the campus, then we're going to be dinosaurs sooner than we maybe expect, because of how fast this world really is changing, and how fast technology is going to continue to provide solutions that make things that looked very complex 10 years ago in an IT job become mundane, very simple, automated tasks.
I think that's right. And there's a lot of studies on automation. On the Internet of Learning's website, I actually have a Bain study on automation and how, more than half the jobs will be automated by 2030. I think what you said that strikes a chord with me reminds me of some of the conversations I've had with other institutions where, they outsourced email because they decided they don't need to be in the email business anymore, but repurposed, or that's probably a strong word, but they trained their email engineers to be more strategic. And more focused on the mission. You mentioned a lot of these low-hanging fruits. What are 3 big things you're working on now? You mentioned sitting at the big table. I mean, what are the 3 things that take up most of your time? And and how are you executing on it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, 18 months in, I thought I would be spending less time. I thought I would have a much better grasp of some of what I came in wanting to do, which is get to know what mattered to people. I guess I'm finding that the more I've done it, the more I want to do it. The more value I'm seeing in the feedback that's generated, and also in how people feel when they are listened to. And so we have one of our big areas of low-hanging fruit as a IT organization is to spend more time listening to what people want. We have kind of within our business model, we're recharge on our network and kind of how we're set up with the campus and how we work with many of the colleges and departments. And so they see us as, if it's broken, I'll have to call you, but otherwise I wouldn't reach out to you for a solution.
Interesting. Yeah.
You don't really get to what we call out in the master plan about IT abundance. You really don't get to defining IT abundance is their point of view. It's that customer's point of view, that student or that faculty or staff member. They define what IT abundance is, right? They tell us.
Yeah.
And so, number one is spending as much time as possible listening, because the second point I would say a good project example right now is we have spent a considerable amount of time talking to a few potential partners, but one of which we've had some really interesting and exciting dialogue with Apple out in Cupertino.
Right.
And so we've had a lot of dialogue about how that small company out there that does a little bit. And so in dialogue and discussion with a company of their size, but with the focus that they have on education and how they understand, I believe, higher ed, and then kind of looking forward, you can catalyze the desire from people across the campus that see opportunities for, the 5s and 10s, or the program that says, hey, we need some solutions. You can see bringing a provider, a partner like Apple to the table and putting their resource and their energy, their thought, and the partners they bring, their thought to that same discussion. All of a sudden now you really have some power, and you have folks on campus that start to see that maybe the problems or the challenges that they have are shared across other colleges or other departments, right? What kind of multiplication of those resources can happen once folks start to realize that, we can actually, and we don't have to be face to face. I mean, we can jump on a call. We can, reach out and talk about this mind share for 30 minutes, and you start hearing, the ideas pour out. Well, I've been waiting to do this for a couple of years because I really didn't know where to go with it. We didn't know if anybody would kind of help us consult on this. And, that's a big opportunity for us. Those partnership opportunities, and being able to bring, I think, Apple to the table in a respectful way, in a way that where they really feel as a partner, they feel heard, but they also know that they're going to get engaged at the right levels. You start to have some really good synergy that we believe is going to turn into some really creative and innovative outcomes in the next couple of years.
And I think that's right. I think the more you look to innovate, the better the experience is. In your answer, though, one of the things that piqued my interest, you talked about, listening to constituents, the faculty, the students, the staff, the administrators. I think that's spot on. I think what every IT person in higher ed can agree with, though, is that we live in a thankless world. So, if the Wi-Fi is down, you will hear about it 1,000 ways to Sunday. But no one will ever write an email to you, Heath, being like, "Dear Heath, the internet is so fast. Thank you." It's become an expectation, right? I mean, and it's tough.
Yeah.
So how do you shift the culture, to your point, of IT abundance, right? How do we go from being the guys who fix stuff, and girls and women, to the people who innovate, who solve complex problems? Come to IT because we're here to solve those complexities, and we're so operationally efficient that email won't go down. How do you create that change industry-wide, whether you're a big school like Kentucky where everyone thinks you have endless money, which isn't true, to the small school in the middle of nowhere that has 2 people in their IT staff?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. So from my perspective, one big need, one major focus in the next 4 to 5 years is what I would say when I sit in front of our CIO, when I sit in front of Dr. Monday, our CFO, I would say we need the industry to grow up fast. We need, and let me qualify some of that by saying, we don't need to just look for solutions that work in higher ed. I mean, if a solution can work for a Fortune 500, if a solution can work for a company with 10,000 employees, and that solution happens to bring some strong maybe efficiencies or strong robust infrastructure that helps us run a cleaner network that is uptime is what you want it to be on a campus of 800 acres, which ours is, then we should be learning about what that opportunity is and how that partner or those partners, because it might not just be one, bringing together solutions like, managing your network more efficiently might mean there's multiple partners at the table, just like we don't build a new building with one company, right? The list of companies on that list, the architects, the contractors, I mean, you go down, you're going to probably be dealing with 45 or 50 companies through, the one partner that you select on the project. So we in thinking about future of IT services, we've got to create tables external of us too. We've got to sit with, and I do think there are tentpole partners. I mean, I went to Cisco Live last year. I went to AWS, here Amazon. This year I'm going to go to Microsoft, and at some point I'd like to get out and hear Google talk about some of the different things that they're doing. But they're not the only ones, but those guys they're pretty big tentpoles in this industry. We've got a partnership right now with Palo Alto working on kind of on our next gen firewall, which we're not unique in. Many universities have pursued that in recent years. You sit with these companies and you listen to the way they talk about the future industry, and the word automation is coming out of their mouth every other sentence. So we know that these partnerships, we know that these webs of who are running these biggest companies and where the money is flowing to infuse the next big startup that turns into the next legit thing. We know that they are out there and that those business proposals are going to be ready for us to pay attention to. I would like for them to grow up and be ready for that sooner than later, so that we aren't just waiting for, well, let's let 100 universities do it before we test it. We might not want to be number one, but I would love to be out there on some of the front lines when we think about network especially, but when we think about some of the other ancillary things that we're focused on, like the services that we currently provide, maybe in storage with our VMs, and how we look at the cloud of the future on campus relative to research, right? But then relative to just the everyday needs of a campus environment. I mean, the speed and the rapidity of which our customers are going to need those things is going to continue to grow.
So I got two more questions, and then I'll pause to see if you have any concluding thoughts. But we use the term customer a lot. And I heard recently that if a university can go out of a business, then it has to be a business. And IT and technology and, this concept of the Internet of Learning, technology can prove to be one of the great economic engines to the future of higher ed. But again, there's nuances in that, right? Like, are we truly a business in higher ed? With all of the public attention around the cost of education, how do you see your role and IT's role in general to the quote unquote business of higher ed? And do you believe it's a business, or do you think we really serve a higher, more altruistic purpose than, P&Ls and for-profit industries?
Well, yes. So I would, the aspiration to me is what keeps bringing me back to it. So I think, that desire to be a part of an environment where people are told, given the tools, informed on ways that they can change the world. It's very aspirational and almost utopia to say that. That is what I want to be a part of in working at a university, right? So somebody asked me a few months ago, well, tell me what the title Associate CIO means. Like, what does that mean? What do you do?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I can only tell you why I'm here. I'm here because I want to change the world. Like, the why for me is I want to be a part of changing the world. I would like to be, as a university, a part of inspiring those really smart people that are can be the smartest people in the room, that come possibly from all over the world, not just from Lexington, Kentucky, or not just from western side of the state. They could come from anywhere. That University of Kentucky could be a part of creating this culture and this desire that learning is going to lead you to creating this future that you almost couldn't imagine. So that is very superfluous to say. I would point out, again, I'm only 43. I've lived, I think, in a very, I reflect, I've lived in a very comfortable time, but I grew up probably like yourself, right? Grew up with family members who had different experiences than that.
Yeah.
My grandfather fought in World War II, and I remember, ways he would talk about his educational experience and time he spent getting his degree, which was pretty rare in those days to actually finish a degree for somebody in his stead, with his background, with lack of funds, so on and so forth. But one thing that has always stood with me as I've kind of grown up in this sector is that it does feel like in these comfortable times of the 90s and the 2000s and how much we have as a society, we come to school. I went to school very much to be in business or to be in this degree program that would get me to this job. And so I do believe that we, right now in our IT world, in our campus jobs, in these administrative functions, we kind of are doing what we were taught and what we learned to do. And there's nothing wrong with kind of taking, the chance as individuals. There's nothing wrong with inspiring this thought that I can be a part of, I can actually lead discussion and dialogue. I can have energy that I bring to this idea that we are educators, that we're all here for this purpose. I would love to inspire, some young computer science student or some communication student who says, my dream is to help put somebody once again on the moon. I want to be a part of what SpaceX is doing in the next 10 years. And I would like to see us put a person. Why can't I, as a staff member at the University of Kentucky, where I have some autonomy with my time, like we all as employees do, we can choose if we're going to sit down and go through a website or if we're going to go sit down at lunch and visit with someone. I would love to believe that my days can be spent inspiring that, and that I can encourage others to want to do that same thing, with the idea that, this doesn't just have to be about getting that rote business desk job or that, traditional IT job. You can do that and get access to so much more through a campus environment. So that's what gets me excited about it.
And I think for any listeners who are, mid-career or early career like myself, that's what you want to hear, right? You want to be surrounded by leaders who see a higher purpose and calling to what we do. I think part of the challenge we all face, whether you're in higher ed or somewhere else, is sometimes we're so focused and nose deep in the day-to-day that we lose sight as to why we're even doing it. And I think for me, even in my current role at Apogee, it's about accessibility. It's about creating opportunities that a lot of people didn't have before, right? I think in your role in IT, you touched on a lot of things, but think about all the people who couldn't afford or access higher ed before that now have access to it because of the technology and the things that you've created at Kentucky. Last question, and to kind of end on a more lighter note, what's the craziest or funniest or most ridiculous thing a vendor has offered you or suggested to you, or was like, dude, Heath, you got to do this? Because I know there's some crazy ones out there.
Yeah. Without naming any names, I have two examples, but my favorite, since I've been at the University of Kentucky, and I had no idea, Rajiv, coming into IT, how big the vendor community was.
Go to Edinburgh. There's 30,000 vendors.
Unbelievable. I mean, I literally need an inbox just for the vendors. The email goes there, and I'm not unique. I think if you work in IT on a campus, and you've got a title inside the IT organization, I mean, they're emailing everyone, all the ladies and men on our leadership team. We get them all the time, and it's fascinating. But I've never experienced that in some of these other areas that I've worked in. I thought this was the classic though. One of folks on our staff came to me a couple months ago, and he said, "Hey, we've got to be in Austin in 2 weeks. We won an award." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'm like trying to tell you, well, what did we win? What we won this award from this company that we just signed to use for the cybersecurity software." And I'm like, wait. We won an award for buying their software? Well, yeah, they voted and they said that we were the ones that won this award. You untie the ribbon on this thing. Ultimately, we bought the software and they wanted to have an excuse to give us pats on the back. And so they invited us to something that they were doing in Austin, Texas. I'm like, there's no award there. God love some of the folks I work with. They actually thought this was a legitimate thing. So it does concern me a little bit on common sense. And we've had some talk since then about, kind of peeling back the onion. The other one that cracks me up is just that when there's a big movie premiere in the last 18 months, I've been invited to all of them. They have these things at movie theaters. Just show up at I'm like, I'm not. If I go watch the Avengers, I'm going with my kids, and I'm not going to watch it with an IT vendor. I'm sorry, I'm not doing it. But I mean, show up and watch, Last Jedi. Come watch it. I'm like, no. I mean, I'm not wearing my costume to your event. Okay, I'll wear my costume to an event with my children. Okay,
that's awesome.
So
actually, I love that. So I should throw away the tickets that I've been buying for everyone, is what you're telling me.
It's useless. It's useless.
I gotta say,
let's stream it on Twitch. Let's stream it on Twitch.
Right.
How about that?
That's right. We'll FaceTime while we go to the theater together. Oh man. Exactly. Anyways, this was really, really fun. I appreciate you and your time. Any concluding thoughts or any questions you have for me, or anything you want to leave everyone with?
No, I feel like I've talked a lot. I do think the point of kind of what brought about you asking these questions, but maybe the larger point of why you are creating this podcast and your impetus for doing it, to bring together some voices, perspectives, thoughts that can be shared with folks across, the higher education landscape, colleges and universities that desire to get engaged. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of it and love, the opportunity to connect with others across campuses around the country and hopefully, down the line, even around the world. So very much a privilege to be a part of it and to be a part of your first one with somebody like yourself and the quality and character of kind of who you are. So appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And I think you actually said it perfectly in the beginning. When you were talking about esports, you talked about community, not competition. I think in the industry we live in, we're privileged in the fact that we can build strong communities. And while we do compete with each other to some degree, I think the entire world is better served when we collaborate with each other, making education more accessible, more affordable, more exciting, more relevant. And I think, the purpose of the Internet of Learning is the fact that technology can be that powerful flywheel getting us there. And so, I'm personally appreciative for leaders like you at Kentucky, and we've got a great lineup of interviews coming up. Our next one is with the CIO of University of Oregon, Jesse Minton. So I'm excited to explore with her and build off some of the conversations we've had with you here, Heath. And looking forward to it. I'm going to stop this recording. Do not hang up so we can catch up afterwards. Thank you, everyone, and look forward to talking soon.